So good evening. I'll ask my GardenShip friends to join me on screen. I'm Patrick Mann. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that I'm located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Chinantan nations, on land connected with the London Township and Sonbra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. I respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. And I acknowledge the historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada, and I'm committed to working to reveal and correct miseducation and misunderstanding, as well as to being active in renewing respectful and creative relationships with Indigenous communities. So, good evening. As said, I'm Patrick Mann. I'm one of the co-curators of the exhibition GardenShip State. And I'm here with co-curator Jeff Thomas and 9 of the 20 in total artists and writers who make up the project. And you will be meeting those 9 as well as Jeff momentarily. It's an honor to welcome you to this panel entitled Water is Life. And in these troubled times, there seems little that's more urgent than the problems of water. And we need only to think about what we're observing in BC and in places such as Iqaluit. And we'll be thinking about those problems throughout the evening. But by way of background, I want to just say something about our show, and we want to give you a little bit of a taste of what GardenShip State is all about. So this show emerged from a plan that was initiated about 5 years ago to lend voice to addressing what is arguably the problem of our times, environmental catastrophe. The exhibition is taking place at Museum London in London, Ontario, which is located at the forks of the Deshkanzibi, which is also known as the Thames River. GardenShip State is similarly focused on a confluence, so it brings together 20 artists and writers from across Turtle Island, from areas within Canada and the United States. The show presents artworks comprising textiles, photography, sculpture, video, installation, and gardening that engage with issues around decolonial critique, environmental activism, and protest against government and industrial complicity in the ongoing climate crisis. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to co-curator Jeff Thomas to say a few words, and then we'll begin the slideshow.
Thanks, Patrick. I'll just briefly speak about the kind of one of the pillars underlying the exhibition in terms of my contribution to it. Is with the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which was a document forged in 1613 between my ancestors and the Dutch colony that was rapidly emerging around Albany, New York. My ancestors, the Haudenosaunee, realized that there had to be some sort of framework if people were going to be able to coexist on the land and on the water. And so it's essentially represented by 2 lines, 2 purple lines that represent the two groups, and the water base as the negotiation place in terms of finding a sense of respect for each people, and to also find a way to live with some sort of coexistence and respect. The exhibition brings together the artists that I felt, as a diversified group, exemplified the idea of the Two-Row Wampum Treaty in terms of being able to work together to bring together this exhibition, and also the fact that the museum is located at the confluence. I find that in general that there's a very sense of sacred space around these particular places, because so many groups of people prehistorical met and negotiated at these sites, and it's happening today. So the idea that I think more than anything else is the fact that we want to be able to show that we can work together as groups of people coming from different areas, different backgrounds, and different practices. And essentially, this is is for myself the strength of the exhibition. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And I just want to say that it's certainly been an inspiration working closely with Jeff and with all of the artists and writers on this project, and even in these Zoom times, which at certain points make us feel a little hemmed in. We've had amazing conversations in the spirit of the two-row wampum that Jeff has been so forthcoming in working with us around. So now we're going to move to just give you a little taste of the exhibition by giving you a bit of a tour of Museum London. I will say that today we have 9 participants in the exhibition, as well as Jeff and myself. And the other, that leaves 9 others who have already presented when we were fortunate enough to do an actual live opening at Museum London. So the other artists who are not joining us this evening have already spoken about their work in public, but we'll be showing you their work, and they will be, Jeff and I will be talking about it a little bit. And in addition to that, of course, you're going to be hearing from the artists and writers that we have here this evening. So I'm going to share my screen and get the slideshow rolling. And I realize I forgot to. There we go. So here you have the list of people who are joining us this evening: Laurie Blondeau, Tom Cull, Michael Farnan, Amelia Fay, Joan Greer. Mark Kasumovic is in England, and we're hoping he makes it. Adrian Stimson, Andres Villar, and Michelle Wilson. And we're also going to be seeing work by Ron Benner, Sean Caulfield, Paul Chartrand, Jamili Hassan, Sharmis Thakar, Jessica Karuhanga, Mary Mattingly, Quinn Smallboy, and Ashley Snook. So this is the entrance to the show. This is the main floor of Museum London, and on the main floor we have these spectacular works by Laurie Blondeau, who is here this evening, and also one of 2 video poems by Tom Cull that we're going to be hearing about a little later as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Laurie.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be part of this exhibition and this whole I look at it as a whole process that we went through to get to the show with meetings and coming together. First, I just want to start by acknowledging we lost a huge community member, a matriarch, Lee Miracle, this past week.
Yeah, I think that kind of covers the forced migration piece. I worked with my partner, Angus Cruikshank, to do the sound design. And then the second part of this installation is that one of the bison whose story I'm telling in that piece is this outlaw bison. So when the Canadian government bought the bison that were on the Flathead Reserve, they were able to load cows and calves because of their social bond, and because bison society is such a strong matriarchal culture. You can move calves and sisters and mothers, they will kind of move together. But elderly bulls really have no connection socially to those groups. And so to get them on rail cars and move them over the border was just not possible. And so those bison that were left on the land were called outlaw bison, and they were shot. Their hides and skulls were sold for taxidermy. And one of them, this beautiful fellow, ended up in the Manitoba Museum collection. And the ability of the researchers at the Manitoba Museum to follow back his story and really provide a narrative of his identity was very inspiring to me. And so while the story they told, it was not the story I would tell, it really did move me and inspire this work. So Patrick and Jeff and everyone at Museum London worked with the Manitoba Museum to have him brought here to be in the exhibition. And I asked that he be taken off the wall and put on this plinth to really subvert and change the way we read him as a taxidermied figure. And he is really a very affecting presence, I think, in the exhibition. I also created an audio essay that tells his story from my perspective, and it's available at the museum through a QR code. And yeah, in the museum, there's also posters for the forced migration piece that give you the transcripts of all the audio. So if it's not accessible to you, those are available. And we're also selling posters of that piece that are screen printed as a fundraiser for the roundhouse that is being built at Chippewa of the Thames. I've got a prop. So those are available through the through the store at the art gallery. So I just thought I would put that out there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I'll move along. Speaking of the Manitoba Museum, we have Amelia Fay, who is the curator of the Hudson Bay Collection at the Manitoba Museum. And I haven't been actually mentioning where people are hailing from at this point, but I should have said that Jeff is in Ottawa, and I think you heard that Laurie is in Winnipeg. And so Amelia is also in Winnipeg. Michelle is here in London with me. Amelia?
Thanks so much, Patrick and Jeff, and on all my team members here on GardenShip. It's been such a wonderful project to be part of. So when I first was sort of brought into the project as a writer, I was thinking about how my role as the curator of a Hudson's Bay Company collection, which is rather a charged collection, and how that plays into the themes of the project, and thinking about colonialism and thinking about climate change and how they're entwined. So I was working on an essay for that, and then Patrick and Jeff invited the writers to kind of put something in the exhibition as well, which was really exciting and also slightly terrifying. And I started trying to think about how I could put my work into this show. How could I make that happen? And one of the ways that I've sort of been thinking about the project. So my piece is called Curating Colonialism, because that's essentially what I do with my job. But it really kind of explores some of the challenges I'm facing in this role, in that, how do you, I ask these questions about how do you decolonize the colonial? How can you reconcile the irreconcilable? And so I was trying to think about how I could put something together for this. And the moccasins were something that came forward for me as one of these sort of what I call everyday objects. So a large part of the museum collection consists of relatively like everyday objects, like moccasins. Everybody was wearing moccasins. And moccasins are one of the first sort of articles of clothing that a lot of the European traders and colonizers adopted into their own wardrobes, because moccasins were just so far superior for the land. And I started thinking about, how in museum world, we sometimes separate certain types of objects. So there's sacred objects, and we have different protocols for dealing with sacred objects. But I started to question, well, what about the everyday objects, and do they not warrant special treatment too? And so my third sort of embroidery piece asks, do everyday objects miss their home communities too? Because I think about not just the sacred objects, but also these everyday objects as having stories to tell, having their own history by the makers who made them. So part of this piece, my embroideries, was my attempt at kind of thinking about connecting with the works that I curate. So there's fantastic embroidery on those moccasins. And one of the infuriating parts of the moccasins and many pieces in the collection is that they're linked to the white male traders who acquired them, and the artists who made them are not recognized at all. So in fact, those moccasins just say a Cree woman made them, but who and from what community? So when I started doing the embroidery, something I hadn't done in quite a few years, it really helped me actually feel more connected to the collection that I curate and some of these topics to approach. And then I started to get nervous about my embroidery looks rather clunky. And, I'm not really necessarily super skilled. And then I was sort of brought back to some of the works that I've been, pretty privileged to work with a lot of knowledge keepers and Métis beaters and embroiderers. And so one in particular here in Winnipeg, Janine Crouchy, I remember her always telling me, like, only the creator is perfect. And so thinking about my works and getting all stressed out about it, and then hearing her voice saying only the creator is perfect. And I feel like that kind of is something that's a thread that kind of moves through some of the topics we talk about in the project too. So my work was really just about sort of bringing forward some of the issues I grapple with as a curator in a museum today, and as a curator of a corporate collection, and how that all interferes with the environmental and a lot of the work Michelle was talking about too. I mean, the decimation of the bison as well. So there's so many threads that can be connected through many of us in this project, but that's my little piece there.
Thanks so much, Amelia, and thank you and everybody for your willingness to take a risk, and some of the, I think it is even a level of bravery to do some of the kinds of work that people have taken on. So now I'm turning it over to Tom Cull, who is a poet and also has become a video maker. Tom is here in London.
Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Amelia, for introducing that idea of taking risks, because yes, I'm a poet and a writer on this project, and I was invited in, which was lovely. And I first thought I was going to write a poem, and I may still yet for this show. But I really wanted to capture some of the work that I do in the community with a group that I started with my partner, Miriam Love, 10 years ago, called Antler River Rally. We organize monthly cleanups of the river. We advocate for river health and water protection. And I wanted to bring the river into the gallery space. It flows right by Museum London. And I wanted to bring it in there, and I wanted to kind of capture community voices at work, pulling objects out of the river and cleaning up. And so I met these two brilliant filmmakers, Danielle Butters and Shruti Ramanarayanan, who just graduated from Fanshawe in film, and they came onto the project. And so all the filmmaking is really their brilliance. But what we did is we filmed a couple of cleanups here in London, but also at Oneida Nation of the Thames, which is 20 minutes downstream from London. We worked with Brandon Dockstader, who's the environmental coordinator there. And so we did a community cleanup there as well. So we asked people to reflect on early memories of water, what water means to them, what it meant to do this work of collecting garbage, and then we kind of cut these films into these video poems. And aside from like bringing the river into and the community into the gallery space, I wanted to think about kind of the connection between art and activism. Patrick has a lovely quote in one of the films where he talks about, we can talk about the work of art, but we should also talk about art at work. And so that was one of the kind of ideas that I was working with. But I also, kind of wanted to talk about water and have other people share about water and think about how water is something that connects us to each other in upstream and downstream relations, but also to think about how water is also a marker of disconnection and of ongoing colonial violence. This is, brought home by the fact that, just 20 minutes downstream at Oneida Nation of the Thames, they are currently on a boil water advisory. Chippewa of the Thames, which is right next door, also has recently been on a boil water advisory. And the reason for this is that one of the reasons, contributing factors, is what we do upstream here in London to our water, which flows downstream and is on the same water table that they draw their drinking water from. So in September of this year, just a couple of months ago, we had a couple of nights of incredibly heavy rain. And it overwhelmed our sewer system, and the city released 60 million liters of raw or partially treated sewage into the river. And so, of course, that flows downstream. So that's also something that these films want to kind of, bring to light and to discuss not only the way that water connects us, but the way that water, as a medium, marks these ongoing colonial and colonial disconnections and colonial violences. So that is kind of what that's basically what those two films do. There's one upstairs in the gallery and downstairs in the gallery. And I think that's about it for me. So thank you very much. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Tom. Great to hear you're connecting the theme of water, which is going to be part of the subject of the later part of this panel as well. So now we have several artists who are not here this evening. The first being Ron Benner, and Ron Benner is an important London-based artist who has an international career and also works very actively in relation to certainly biological life, plant life, are thinking about food and specifically corn, which Jeff will talk about a little bit later. This installation is called As the Crow Flies, and it actually is about from a period of about 30 years ago. There's a garden behind Museum London, which is by Ron Benner, and it's also called As the Crow Flies. So this piece basically documents or is based on a series of research trips that Ron did over about an 8-year period along the meridians of longitude that go south from both London, Ontario, and Toronto. And so the piece is a document, and it documents Native American plants, it documents place names, and also Indigenous nations found along those meridians. And so where you see the text on the above and below on the wall, all of those various names of plants and Indigenous nations are listed. And then there's also a whole range of found objects and seeds and dried plants that are from those zones as well. It's a spectacular piece, very immersive, and you can see that on the floor there's also texts that refer to those locations that Ron has so carefully and in many ways bravely, I think, really sort of gone into in order to get some information to put this spectacular piece together. So I'm moving along. Certainly, there's a strong emphasis on Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations, but I would also say that the show has a broader, perhaps we could say more sort of global reach. And so we're going to hear, from about some work by artists who are not originally from Canada. This is just a view down the main hall of another part of the exhibition. And then these are two works, one by Jamili Hassan, who's also a London artist whose family is originally from Lebanon, and Jessica Karuhanga, who's an artist from Toronto, whose family is also, I believe, originally from Ghana. And so with Jessica's work, the work is entitled Blue is the Insides, and it's a real meditation on a kind of sense of disconnection between spaces, between the space of the indoor and the outdoor. And so what we see is this woman, a dancing figure who's gesturing, reaching in moments of solitude, and there's a strong sense of loneliness and grief and loss. And Jessica herself has asked the question, what's the efficacy of art in a period riddled with unending uncertainty? So in a show like GardenShip State, we see a lot of work that has fairly strong political messages. And I would say that this work is also political, but there's a strong poetics about the way Jessica has handled her subject. And it's also accompanied by a score that she was party to helping develop. Quite a spectacular work. And then this is an image of the work of Jamili Hassan. In the foreground, we have a work called Gizzard Shad that I'll tell you about. And then in the distance, we have a number of mosaic pieces that Jamili has also made, some of them with words in Arabic, and I'll be showing you some other close-ups. But the mosaic directly in front of you is entitled Gizzard Shad. And it's based on a photograph that Ron Benner took for Jamili Hassan of the Deshkanzibi, the river, during the winter last year, when there was a sudden confluence of warm storm water and cold river water that brought about the entrance of these gizzard shad fish in a way that's unlikely in London at this time of year. And so Jamili was really interested in essence, in responding to these swirling forms. And so she did that in a somewhat abstracted way. But she says that she found a moment such as this to be an immense presence and comfort during the months of COVID-19 in last year's winter. So it's a very sort of almost a meditative piece. And we're going to be seeing another work by Jamili that's specifically made for this exhibition as well. So I'm moving along. And this is another piece by Jamili on the right-hand side and also one on the left. And you can see beyond that work by Mary Mattingly and also work by Mark Kasumovic. But on the right-hand side, you'll probably recognize the sign that Greta Thunberg is so famous for holding up in protest. And so Jamili has turned that into a mosaic. And now we're going to be hearing from Andres Villar, who also came into the project as a writer, although Andres has quite a background as an artist. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Andres.
Hello, thank you, Patrick. So my work here, entitled Birdsong, is a sculptural sound piece. So it has those two components, the chair, a fairly simple piece or seemingly simple piece, a chair that's turned upside down, put up on the wall. And then you can see a speaker there as a kind of sculptural quality. And the chair, alludes to notions of things that have been put to other uses, to ruins, to things can be repurposed by humans or by non-humans. And there are also kind of our historical references for people, chairs, ready-made objects that people want to excavate further. Chairs that appear quite a bit in art. But the sound piece itself was inspired or responding to a famous book by Rachel Carson, who was a scientist and an author. And probably her best known work is Silent Spring, published in 1962. And that book became a huge sensation and is considered by some people the beginning of, or spurred on the environmental movement, give it quite a boost, because it put in a popular realm the idea that chemicals in this particular instant were causing havoc and leading to a lot of death and disease in the environment. And she was pilloried and opposed by the chemical industry. And of course, we're at the height of the idea of progress and modern and everything. So she was seen as anti-American and all this kind of thing. But I found interesting the poetic notion of the silent spring. And when she speaks about silent spring, she's speaking about things such as the bird song that disappears. And her book opens with a chapter called A Fable for Tomorrow, which I think was an interesting strategy. It's a popular book with scientific information, but for a wider audience. And so it's a little fable, a kind of narrative, a storytelling, a kind of a what if. So she talks about a town in which they wake up and all of a sudden, you don't hear the birds anymore, and all this thing is going on. There's a little kind of dust, strange dust. People are getting sick. And so it's setting up a kind of dystopian future for us to think about, or for audience to think about what happens with all this technology, particularly these chemicals that are being thrown out into the environment, the implications of that, what's happening. And so the idea of the silent spring, that not hearing the birds again, I incorporated that into this particular piece. The sound itself, it begins with a recording of birds, common birds that you hear here in my backyard, chickadee, blue jay, crow, and you hear them calling, and slowly these are taken over by digital instruments that replicate the calls of the bird calls. And those particular software instruments, or those files, were made by using a digital, very standard digital audio program, and taking the bird calls and using a function within the program that tries to replicate the particular bird calls. It creates a little MIDI file that you can then send to some software instruments, and it tends to sound like the bird calls. So it tends to reproduce the rhythm and some of the pitch, but obviously when the sounds are too complicated, there's quite a mismatch. So the idea of the birds disappearing and then coming to substitute the birds, this idea of an artificial sound of the birds created by algorithms, I thought was an interesting idea of thinking about as things disappear, the notion of irretrievable loss. There's a certain sense that we will be able to tackle things like the climate emergency and other big issues that confront us through the use of technology. And although technology plays a part, we know that technology, any incorporation of technology, such as the chemicals that Rachel Carson spoke about, and others, nuclear energy and so forth, they have unintended consequences that can be quite horrific. So that idea that the hubris that technology would always save us is, to a certain extent, built into this particular work. We have the birds, and then we have something that simulates birds, simulacra of birds that seem to take their space, a space that the birds disappeared, and we have something artificial that we think will substitute, but of course there's no substitute for something that's lost, they're lost forever. So in general, that's kind of the idea that I was playing with in this particular work.
Thanks very much, Andres. Andres is here in London, although he's originally from Colombia and has been living in Canada for a long time. Before I move along, we have a couple of questions which I'll just sort of throw out to the artists to think about as you're talking about your work. One asks, what do you hope people will take away from the exhibition? And the other says, for any of the artists who would like to answer, what was the hardest part about the artistic process for you? What part did you think made the most impact on you? So if that's something you want to bear in mind as you're talking about your work, that would be great. And now we're at the work of Mark Kasumovic, and Mark is in Leicester, England. He's originally from Hamilton, Ontario, but has been living and working in England for a number of years. And I think he didn't show up. I was checking our boxes, but he doesn't seem to be here. So I'll just say a few words about Mark's really spectacular photography. And Mark has worked all around the world documenting both sites of environmental degradation, but also sites, and this picks up on Andres's comment about technology, sites where technology is in some ways sort of glorified or valorized in ways that are sometimes rather curious and troubling. In the case of this work, Mark has worked on the coast of the UK in a couple of conservation areas. And if you could see the work up close, you would see that one of the roadways is subtly falling away. Well, if we think about what's going on in BC today, it's a very subtle marker of environmental degradation. The other thing that Mark's work includes, and actually I'll just, I'll say something about the video. It's entitled Rot Nest, and it's kind of a meditation on the work of a group of scientists around a particular tiny body of water. And so Mark's really interested in essence, the sort of detail around questions of the environment. And then the last thing I want to offer on behalf of Mark is this piece, which is called Birdwatching Hut. And so you can see that it doesn't appear like birds are beyond the windows of the hut. Industrial England is. And so it's a somewhat elegiac piece and very powerful. And we have Mark's work set up alongside the work of Mary Mattingly. And Jeff, did you want to say something about Mary's work?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll read the short paragraph that we have that explains her work.
Great.
Which I think is probably more along the lines of her own words. And I think too, Patrick, she's based around the New York City area.
Right.
Okay. The Actobian Library is a public toolkit that stems from a belief that art and Actobian thought can be part of cultivating systematic social change. It combines disciplines including forestry, botany, geology, the arts, including literature, poetry, philosophy, and social sciences. People have contributed stories, objects, digital files, experiences, or books to build a toolkit that can help expand imaginations to co-build more regenerative futures within climate change. The one point that I'll add to this is that one of my photographs is included in this area as well, as a part of the process of the value of the library and knowledge as power. And this is one of the things that attracted me to Mary's work as well, along with the idea that I won't go into explaining the kind of satellite site that we have at the public library in London, but this will be explained further, and you'll see more photographs when we talk about the another aspect of the corn project here. But this is a view of the second floor or third floor installation space that we have there, where people can come up to the area and look at the books, and also to the taxidermy objects that you saw, the butterflies and the birds and that, which were borrowed from the university. Which one is it, Patrick?
Yeah, from the zoology museum there. Yeah.
Yes, and this was another like with the bison head, another way of expanding on for Mary to build up her library installation and to present it in this way. So it's a very contemplative space, but and the objects as well. But one of the things that resonates along the lines of questioning the world that we're a part of, and how we get along in it. So, a library is the great place to begin doing that.
Thanks very much, Jeff. And yeah, I would just add that the London Public Library was very enthusiastic about having Mary's installation there, which basically kind of mirrors aspects of the installation at the museum. So we're really appreciative of that. Now I'm going to talk briefly about my own work. So these are two very large scale works that are about 5 feet by 7 feet, and one that's somewhat smaller scale. And they focus, they're a little bit hard to read, although I'll show you a detail of one of them, but they focus on the idea of flags and emblems. And as somebody coming from a print background, I've been interested in things like flags, emblems, markers of place and for ceremony. And so as I was thinking about our project and thinking about the history of colonization and other histories that have really affected the environment, the idea that we're at a kind of a threshold, or we might encounter, say, a flag at a threshold where something like change, sometimes change for the better, often not change for the better, may occur. So this is one of the pieces I did, and Jeff Thomas kindly agreed to, in essence, lend me the image, which is the Caledonia occupation site, which he took a photograph of in 2008. And I was really interested in this as a threshold, a place where where Indigenous people are protesting about the encroachment on their land, and the importance of those flags there. But the way I work as a printmaker, somebody with a printmaking background, I'm literally carving the image out of mat board and then putting a kind of pearlescent ink into the lines that I've made. So there's a sense in which the image, at least in my way of thinking about it, is both appearing, coming into view, but also has the potential of disappearing. And so the other images in this selection of my work also are preoccupied with that. In essence, I'm asking us, as viewers, I'm asking us to think about what it means at this moment of what I think of transition, the kind of transitory images that we may be used to. What are they telling us, and what are they preparing us for, or preparing us to basically try and change? So I'll leave it at that. And this is another image where we can see the work, my work and Jamili's work, and also the work of Sharmistha Kaur. And Sharmistha is originally from India, and she's in fact back in India visiting her family. She just left after our opening, and she's supplied 3 works to the exhibition. This one is called Soft Shelter Walking Together, and the other little tent that you saw that I'll just refer to in a minute is called Home and Land. And so Sharmistha thinks about the shifting connections to place as she has moved from India to Canada. And her works touch on these themes, and including the themes of migration and resettlement in the wake of colonialism. And Sharmista has talked about, seeing what are effectively tent cities all throughout India, where people are basically migrating for work, migrating due to reasons of displacement. And so her work recognizes a kind of shared history in both the nations that she came from and the nation that she now calls home in Winnipeg, or in Canada, and living in London. She uses embroidery as a form of intervention. So with this image of a tent, you can actually pull the threads of the embroidery in order to expose the tiny little holes that the embroidery has been produced with on this tarp. And then this other piece is called Home and Land. And with this one, Sharmista interviewed or spoke with a number of refugees and other immigrants to London, Ontario. And she asked them to talk to her about these themes of home and land. And she made this tent where she's quoting them, in many cases in their own language. So you can see some of the characters there that are not English. And she also has an English translation of the things that resonate with them about these ideas of home and land. It's a smallish tent that maybe a child would want to enter into, and there is a sense of our really being invited to kind of consider these ideas in an intimate way. So I'm going to move along. We're moving down the hall, as it were, and this is the work of Sean Caulfield. And I think, Jeff, did you want to make a few comments on Sean's work? Sean is in Edmonton.
Sure, I'll just read the statement here in Power Lines. Sean Caulfield considers how we imagine a more just future for and with our children. The series of sculptural toys that references the infrastructure of the fossil fuel industry includes an oil tanker, oil derrick, and military vessel. Alongside these vessels, recognizable contours are several smaller amorphic bodily toys. The work is simultaneously whimsical, absurd, and dark, with an ominous feeling of consequences we all face if we do not build more sustainable and equal communities. And one of the things that I wanted to add here in addressing the question, one of the questions that was proposed in the Q&A list was about the working process and how over time, I was unfamiliar with so many of the different types of art practice that were going on, taking part in the exhibition. But as I learned, listening to each of the artists explain their work, I also began to find connections in terms of to relate to my own work in the ways that I use toy figurines to bring about that same sense of how we view the world. And I think that's a very important point in the exhibition as well, is that idea of being able to analyze and study. And this is one of the hallmarks of the exhibition. But more importantly, I think it was the sense of relationships that we're beginning to see in the work. And consequently, I learned quite a bit about other art practices and about how we all have and work from a common base.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And yes, our writers, when they were working on the journal, referred to cross-pollination, and we'll probably hear a little bit about that, but it does feel like there was a lot of cross-pollination. So now we're moving on. We see Laurie Blondeau's work on the left-hand side here, but we're going to hear from Michael Farnan, who's going to talk about his work. And so I'll turn it over to you, Michael. Michael is in Victoria Harbour.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation on the panel and to be in the show. I think maybe I could address Emily and Kate's kind of questions right off the hop with my work. One thing that hasn't really been discussed so far is that we made this work during the pandemic, or the exhibition was affected quite drastically, or a lot of the artists were. A lot of my work is often done in collaboration and sort of community building projects. And I really sort of found myself working on my own and really sort of thinking about the places that I lived and the places that I traveled and worked. and we'll see the video, just a photo of the video of a place where I was working. But for me, I live on the east side of Georgian Bay. I really thought a lot about the distance between where I am and London, where the show was. And for me, it's this map. It's about the size of I can fit on the wall behind me in my studio. And I really just wanted to explore the settlement history, the settler history of the region. And in particular, looking at the ways that industry and relationships to land and water has affected displacement, the non-human, and just our relationships to water. And where I live on Georgian Bay, we have it's water is our community. We work on the water. There's homes on the water, islands. I'm at the south end of what we call 30,000 islands. And just the other day I was out painting a cottage for somebody on that island. And there's a lot of the settlement here is interesting. There's a lot of displacement. I wanted to really focus on the reserves that have happened. We talk a lot about institutionally about reconciliation and decolonization. I think a lot about what those words mean. And from a settler perspective, I don't think we can really be in a place of reconciliation until we understand our history and our connection to land and water and people. So the map, it's a work in progress, and it's me trying to understand my history and the history of this land. So the video here, it's one of the things that happened during the pandemic was a project I was going to do with Adrian and Lori was canceled. My video practice tends to be collaborative, not sort of individual and experimental. So again, I really had to rethink my art practice a little bit. And I drove when things first shut down, I drove from Victoria Harbor all the way to the East Kootenays of British Columbia to tree plant. And Patrick and Jeff sent me a camera, and I kept that camera with me for the few months I was out there. And the video in the exhibition is sort of a meditation on place, and in particular the Skookumchuck Mill and its location on the Kootenay River, and how it really is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, but a pulp mill can change that quite drastically. So the video is sort of a reflection on that, and just really thinking about place and space and water and how industry changes that, and thinking about connection.
Thanks so much, Michael. You wove together a lot of great thoughts in what you had to say. So we're moving on, and in this area we also have some. These are not very small at all. They're quite large photographs by Lori Blondeau as well. So you saw at the beginning of the talk, you saw the large banners, which are about 16 feet high, and these are probably about 5 feet high. Still very powerful works. Lori, I know you're there. If you want to add anything, you're welcome. Otherwise, we'll keep going.
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Adrian Stimson, who's at Siksika Nation in Alberta and has done this amazing installation. Adrian, you can tell me when you want me to move along. Do you want me to go to the outfit?
Hi, Patrick. No, just stay here and just go slowly through. But I just want to add my chorus to the thanks to you and to Jeff for curating this exhibition. Shout out to my fellow artists. Good to see you all. It's been really wonderful to be a part of this project, and I will speak to my work. I have 4 elements. You see 3 in this particular slide. But I'll start off with my paintings. My paintings are called awasukapi, meaning that many things happen, some good, some bad. It is often used to describe something bad, Yet it can also be subjective, meaning that good things can come of the bad. And really the paintings themselves, Western Canada has been experiencing more and more wildfires, not only destroying forests and communities, but it also fills the air with ash particulate that we all breathe, human and animal, the health effects immediate for those with health issues, and yet unknown health implications for the rest of us. These paintings are emotive response to the fear and the sadness I feel, how we are all caught in these ill winds of change. The flurry of feathers in the wood ash speaks to the presence and disappearance, that we all return to ash, that the birds are seeing a mass extinction in our time. In the past half century, North America has lost 3 billion birds. The next one is Namu Ukukuwa Umukukuta Pesepi, which is bee tower and gopher looking. I've been beekeeping, or I should say my husband and I have been beekeeping for the last 10 years. I undertook it in response to the staggering colony collapses and the real danger that we will lose our pollinators should they disappear. We will fall quickly. The bee tower painted with black graphite in clear gesso, 24-karat gold leaf bees, ghost bees, silhouettes, topped with a copper roof and a great horned owl. In Blackfoot ways of knowing, the owl is pretty respected and has powerful medicines. One fear we have as Blackfoot people is that an owl will land on our roofs. It is a sign of death to come. By placing the owl on the roof of the bee tower, I seek the power of the owl, yet also know that the bees are in trouble and that we must respect and respond to the messages we are given by the animal world. The tower also has light and sound, and the light is to mimic the color of honey or gold within. And the soundtrack is about an hour long, taken from inside one of my hives, then amplified and mixed. At the end, there's about a 5-minute after hours club disco soundtrack meant to add humor, as well as the idea of something is going on in there. The gopher with the gas mask stands in front of the hive, another humorous element. Yet by anthropomorphizing the gopher in this way, I seek to give the animals a voice, to honor that we share this world with them. The next one is Ina Kitapi, Sasiskimoko Ukukuwa, Little People's Greenhouse. The Little People's Greenhouse is an installation that mimics my actual greenhouse. It is painted in the same black graphite gesso mix with a TV monitor on the floor. The 8-minute video is a montage of drone and photos of my home and experience of the pandemic in 2021. I've called it the Little People's Greenhouse to honor the little people of the Blackfoot. They are real and live among us. They take care of us and play tricks on us. The Blackfoot often give offerings to them in the form of food, little clothing, and tobacco. During the planting of tobacco, offerings are made to the little people to take care of the crop. We must make offerings to them to take care of our gardens and our world. And the last element, Namayi Stutushsin, Bumblebee Regalia. This was a collaboration with Payotapiaki Gayaki, Dancing the Opposite Direction Woman, also known as Lucille Wright. But sorry, Lucy, for the butchering of your name. Sorry. Bumblebee Regalia is a response to both my beekeeping and a Blackfoot society. The Bumblebee Society is a children's society, one of the first societies we enter. Its purpose is to prepare the children for future societies by teaching them the protocols of the teepee, where to sit, where the altar is, and all aspects of ceremony. They have their own leader, teepee design, outfits, songs, and dances. The children dance like bees and create swarms. They have sharp bangles on their wrists that they sting people with, a sign of great respect and play. As if you're stung, you must exaggerate the act of getting stung. Currently, the Bumblebee Society is not active. My hope is to be a part of its rejuvenation or reactivation. The Bumblebee Regalia is meant to inspire and play with the tenets of the material culture of this society. Evolution is a big part of Indigenous knowledge, and I seek to evolve the regalia of this society. I have collaborated with dear friend Lucy Wright, a fantastic beater and cultural knowledge holder. Lucy beaded 300 bees for the regalia, and Myrna Youngman attached them. Lucy then beaded the gloves and moccasins to complete the regalia. I created the bumblebee shield as a protector for the bees. Bison rawhide it's made out of. Owl feathers adorn the shield. The bumblebee dancing stick is meant to mimic the bangles that children wear on their wrists. It's complete with an eagle talon stinger, shells, ribbon, and a horsehair tail. The regalia can be activated through performance and has about a 7-minute soundtrack for that purpose. The entirety of the installation is my collaboration or contribution to the GardenShip project, hoping to create moments in time where we can contemplate the impact of our actions on this earth, and that if we observe, listen, and love the world around us, we may be able to change the current direction we are headed in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And I think that your work really does weave together pathos, humor, and hope. So thank you for speaking about it in this way. Sorry we didn't have any straight-on shots of your paintings. We're getting the official photographer is showing up on Monday. So these were taken with my phone. We're moving along. There's just about 3 more artists in this area and then a couple of other pieces we're going to speak about, and then we'll take a little bit of time for discussion. So this is the work of Ashley Snook. Ashley spoke about her work at the opening. It's called The Honey is Sweet. And Ashley's interested in the idea of invasive species of plants. And the one she's looking at is called the Phragmites australis. And she talks about the fact that the presence of invasive Phragmites in Canada reflects the pervasive impact of colonial expansion and industrial processes in southwestern Ontario's native vegetation, endangered species, and the ongoing threat it poses to biodiversity in Canada. And in fact, as part of her installation, she shot this video, and she was actually riding on what's called a trucksaw machine, which is literally almost like a tank that is meant to remove the biomass of these plants. It's both a beautiful and troubling installation. In essence, the video, I think, is quite troubling in the fact that it's showing us the extent of the so-called invasion of these plants. And yet her point, of course, is that we can't blame the plants. And then on the other hand, the objects in the foreground are very poetic responses to the plants themselves, including on the left-hand side, closest to us, is a bronze Phragmite. Excuse me. The last 2 pieces in this area are by Paul Chartrand and one by Quinn Smallboy. I'll say something about Paul's work, and Jeff will talk about Quinn's work. So Paul has done this piece in the frame, which is called Desiccated Root Text. And Paul's work engages with environmental and cultural issues through the construction of cultural assemblages built from carefully chosen and assembled objects. And then he populates his assemblages with living plants. Now, in a museum such as we're having this show in, we weren't able to have actual living plants within the museum due to some of the protocols around the collection. So Paul's All Flesh is Grass sign is actually sort of dried. But what Paul did do was plant another kind of a table with the word sustain within it, and it's located in the Minga Cafe in Dunnville, Ontario. And on the left-hand side, we have a live feed. So you can actually see the plant over time. You can see the plants growing to spell the word sustain. And they're actually using some of their edible plants. So they're using them in some of the salads in the cafe. So we're able to kind of see Paul's work virtually. And the other part of Paul's installation is this beautiful scroll, which is covered with names of hundreds of people who have died in basically the battle in favor of the environment. And Paul has used a plant-based ink to actually produce the scroll. So you can see, you can see, if I just go back a little bit, you can see the length of that scroll and the hundreds and hundreds of names that would be on there. And Jeff, I'll turn it over to you to say something about Quinn's work.
Sure. Quinn Smallboy's artistic practice investigates what it means to be a contemporary Indigenous artist. He says, specifically, I question how customary symbols and icons of Indigenous culture translate into painting, sculpture, and installation. These works, entitled Colors, Small Drum Ring, and Lines, Large Drum Ring, are a flip on a familiar shape within Indigenous culture. These ideas of flipping or reshaping familiar objects provides a new look at Indigenous storytelling. And here you can see Quinn assembling one of the large drum ring at Museum London. One of the things that came from our discussions with Quinn during our Zoom meetings was him talking about the way that his practice moves and energizes and talks about issues that are important. How do we use, as Indigenous people, symbols that have been around and used for sometimes for thousands of years by our ancestors? And it's always been, I think, what I find that what his work exemplifies in this way is that we are a living culture. Just as I spoke about the Tura Wampum Treaty, it's a living document. And so we continue to evolve and adjust, and the notion that Indigenous people kind of live in the past and refuse to move from that position is not true. And that's what I love about Quinn's work. One of the things that I asked him was, what do you think the people in your community would think about your work? And he thought long and hard about that, and it was a question he hadn't considered fully at that point. But that's the idea about what we do as artists and how they speak to the public, how they speak to our families, to our communities, and how do we explain them? How do we begin to build that dialogue? And I think it's important to consider how we speak to our elders in our own communities about the work that we produce, and to get their response as well, and to ensure that we're being respectful of what we use and what we talk about, and to make it to put it in our own words, and to bring this out into the public. I should say that once I saw Quinn's work up in the gallery, it was very heartening for me to see the circular symbol in the space. I always kind of I thought about drums when I saw this work, and I thought about the weaving together of new stories. But there was something very powerful about the circle, and whenever I see a building or anything in the circular format, it brings to mind things that are part of our culture. And here's another example of that taking place in the gallery. So this is a work that I really enjoyed, and I enjoyed the process of working with Quinn when we were talking about the work.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And one of the things that I would add, when Jeff had asked Quinn the question about how his work might be kind of received or thought about in his community, it resonated with me also in relation to some of the conversations that Jeff and I had about really being committed to this exhibition being open to all, and something that people, we could say, people off the street, people, kind of average people could come in and really find something for themselves. And so we've been, heartened that there's been a very big audience coming into the exhibition. And I think they really are finding something, so many things in the exhibition that they can connect with. And certainly Quinn's piece is one of those for sure. So this is just the view down the other direction of that part of the exhibition. And now we're going to just a couple of pieces that are in off-site locations. One of them not so far away. This is in what's called the Community Gallery at Museum London, and it's overlooking the Deshkan Zebi and also Ron Benner's garden. And I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
When we were first looking at the exhibition and possible collaborations between the artists, one of the people that I was really interested in working with was Ron Benner, and our shared interest in the landscape and in the things that sustain us as human beings. And I was also thinking about the confluence here as well. And as I mentioned in the beginning about the power of confluences in rivers with with our ancestors' own coming together at sites like this. So what I wanted to do was originally, before the exhibition was put back because of COVID, I had planned on doing an indoor installation of Ron's work. As the crow flies, Ron's let me use the fencing that he had used in a previous installation, and also the way that he uses photographs with his garden installations as well. I wanted to build on that with the photographs that I used. And so I asked Ron, since we weren't going to have kind of the coming together of the harvesting of his garden with the opening of the exhibition, Ron sent me a box filled with produce from his gardens, and I took the corn and photographed them here, and then connected them, which you can't really see here, but they're related to a photograph of my step-grandfather, Bert General, and the importance of corn and holding it, and being able to just kind of absorb its meaning into yourself. And the bottom photograph is one of a chair that I photographed outside of my elders' home at Six Nations. And then I'm holding tobacco from Ron's garden again. And the chair, it comes from Museum London collection. It was in the possession of a photographer that was based in London, and he gave it to his son as a gift. I think it's an early 19th century chair, but the idea with the chair there, and also too, this was sparked by Andres with his chair in the exhibition as well. And I thought about the old chair that I had photographed of my elders' chair, and this one of waiting for the delegates to arrive. And so the idea was behind waiting for the artists to arrive, coming into the gallery. And it was kind of a greeting space, and the corn and its relationship would be the feast. And then on the left-hand side, there's a poster on top that shows the beginning of the environmental movement in the United States with Stop Littering. They used a photograph in the 1970s to early 1970s of a non-Indigenous man who was portraying a Lakota man, Iron Eyes Cody. And so it was interesting to think about the beginning of that movement and how it was done in error. And so I used one of my Indian figurines as a counterpoint to that as well, and saying, talking about pollution is still an important issue. And then the train cars down here, Ron also worked on the railroad as well, and that was another point that we connected on. These were tanker cars that I photographed when I was in London for another project, and I used them here as well on the fencing. But this is, you know, the idea behind what I hoped that we would bring to the exhibition, and finding these different connections that we all share. And I think that's really important when we think about the contemplative nature of the museum, of the kind of staid space in a way. Traditionally, here it was to bring life to it, to look at the exhibition as a living entity, of us being a part of it and paying respect to it, in the sense of passing on this knowledge and insight that we've gained as artists to the general public. And this is a very important part of what we all wanted to accomplish with this process, and how we bring the notice of a planet in danger to a reality, and start talking about it in realistic terms, and thinking about what can we do. And not only that, I think we didn't touch upon the political aspects of more of things like Caledonia, of colonization, about how we respond to that. These are all intertwined within the exhibition space. And I'll make a note here about working with Patrick as a co-curator. I was brought into the process after the selection of the artists, and I had to find my own way of navigating and finding a relationship and being able to engage with each of the artists as well. And I found that it was that sense that Patrick provided me with, which was to dream, which was to let my mind just kind of go and listen to the artist and absorb what they're saying. And then in turn, how do you turn that into a curatorial project and into a project that can be relatable to the general public as well. And so I'm very grateful to Patrick for us kind of being a counterbalance to each other. And not to say that Patrick isn't a dreamer, but just simply to say that his knowledge and understanding of the art practice that he has of the artist in the exhibition allowed me to be able to dream and to find my way into this important conversation as well.
Oh, thanks so much, Jeff. And I would say that, not to be cheesy, but it was a dream working with you, in the sense that one of the things that, you know, I've known Jeff for 20 years and known him as a photographer and a curator, but now Jeff also refers to himself as a storyteller. And I think that Jeff's capacity for stories and conversations is not only so rich, but so kind of, you know, he's so generous with it that we had amazing conversations, but so did so many, I think all of the artists and writers with Jeff, with us together. And so I think that was a real gift. We're going to move along a little bit, but we had this wonderful comment that somebody put in, and it's John Sutton, who's actually one of the attendants who works at the exhibition. And John says he's an attendant at the show for 3 hours at a time. It's a great exhibition, and one of the things I've enjoyed the most is the way the soundscapes from various exhibits blend together and stand apart as I walk around the space. Some of the sound loops are very long, and if you're not at the exhibit for an extended period, you'll miss many of the sounds. Well done. And I will say that, you know, in COVID times, we weren't able to have, for example, earphones for some of the, like in the case of Mark Kasumovic's video. And so we have a lot of overlapping sound. And we were a little bit worried about that, but it's really beautiful. And, you know, when Andres was talking about his piece, you know, it rises above, but then it falls, and you hear the sound of the train in Michael's piece and the boom, boom at the end of Adrian's piece. And, you know, it's just a wonderful other part of the exhibition, which we're obviously not able to share with you in this way this evening. So we're moving on to now look at Jamili Hassan's work outside of the museum. And Jamili made this new work, which is dedicated to the Deshkan Zibi, to the river. And it's a ceramic tile work, which is located now, this is just after it was kind of inserted. It's located now on what's called the Commons, which is the front green in front of the museum. So it's a map that depicts the Deshkan Zibi, the river. And it's an important work for our exhibition because I think that it actually has the capacity of welcoming visitors with a living gesture of acknowledgement and care. So, you know, it took lots of sort of negotiation with the city, because the city are partly the stewards, or maybe they are the stewards of that green. And it was really a tribute to Jamili that she really saw this piece being part of the exhibition. So we thank her for that. And now moving along to hear from Joan Greer, who was one of the 4 people and perhaps somewhat of a leader in the production of what we're calling a journal. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Joan.
Thank you, Patrick. I just want to preface my remarks to also say what others have been saying in the chat, and also what we were talking about just before we all started, and that is that our hearts are with those of you in British Columbia, especially the lower mainland, who are just struggling and having so many problems. And our theme is water today, and my goodness, that's sure bringing home climate catastrophe when we think of what's going on. So just sending love and wishes of strength to everyone in those areas and all other places that are really struggling with such issues at this point. I want to start by saying I'm really very honored to be part of this GardenShip State project, and I'm pleased to be able to speak to you today about the GardenShip Journal that you see represented here. I always have props too, so I have one in my hand, it's a project that has centered both literally and virtually around the forks of the Deshkan Zibi, where the antlers branch. And This journal is above all a collaborative work. And in introducing the GardenShip Journal, I'd like to then first acknowledge my fellow collaborators. That is my fellow cross-pollinators, Tom Cull, Andres Villar, and Amelia Fay. And I'm speaking on behalf of us all, Tom, Andres, Amelia, and myself, when I gratefully acknowledge our designer, Katie Wilhelm, for her incredible work on the project as well. I'll speak in a moment about what the journal is, but due to its conceptual nature and the process-oriented methodology, all centering around the idea of deliberatively non-extractivist, multi-species, creative collaboration, and generative conversation, and conversation is so important within this project. That's, coming back to this idea of cross-pollination, it's right that we show gratitude, and it's important to identify further and explicitly some of these relational groundings. So accordingly, I just want to say how very grateful we are for the very rich insights and ongoing support given to us by Jeff Thomas and Patrick Mann. We'd also like to acknowledge the other members of the GardenShip project, and we want to thank the staff and volunteers of Museum London, with special thanks to Anita Biedanosti and the London Public Library, with special thanks there to Joanna Kerr. Patrick was talking about the storytelling that we've heard from Jeff and the numerous kinds of meetings that we've been able to have. So a lot of what we're doing here comes back to this notion of exchange and of conversation and of learning and this kind of generative growing together. So that's a really important part of what we've done and what everyone in the project has done, I believe. With the GardenShip Journal, there are three components: the journal itself, and we might go on to the next slide, Patrick, and we'll see some of the other components. So there's the journal itself, and there's a GardenShip cross-pollination map created by Andres Villar. And there's also a seed packet with corn kernels to be taken home and planted. We have overarching themes. We've taken as our starting point a number of the themes inherent in the GardenShip State project, which are present in the journal visually as well as conceptually. And I'll just mention a few of these overarching themes. The first I've already mentioned, it's this idea of pollination and cross-pollination. The second you've heard about as well. It's this very rich notion of the two-row wampum, and particularly that you've heard Jeff speak about this today, and particularly it's about the understandings of this two-row wampum as embodying the possibility to embrace principles of enduring friendship and peace conveyed to us in word and image by Jeff Thomas. It's referenced visually, both on the back and front covers of the journal, along with Michael Farnan's beautiful image, as well as within the pages of the journal. And of these themes, I'd also like to mention corn, which has come up a number of times. Corn runs through the exhibition and it runs through the journal as a recurring motif. It's rich in its references to sustenance and to life. And I'll also say that the confluence of the waters of Deshkanzibi underpinned and informed much of our conversations throughout. And that's in no small part due to Tom's very intimate and long-term understanding and relationship with the river. But it always seemed to enter into our discussions when we were thinking about the journal. So what is the journal? What is this journal that you pick up as you go through the exhibition? Well, it's an interventionist activation piece. It's provocational. It's a welcoming gift, a gesture towards a gift economy, getting us away from the kind of economy that we actually inhabit right now. And so there are copies of it available at the exhibition, and there's also a digital iteration. It's a personal journal. It's intended to belong to the visitor as they go through. And it can be a site of consolation and of comfort in these times of trauma. It's to make one's own as one begins the journey through the exhibition. It's a call for reflection and a call for action, with many places where you can put your own thoughts and your own responses and begin a conversation yourself with what you're seeing and hearing as you go through the exhibition. Related to all this then is it's an invitation. In the journal, we start out by saying, we invite you to engage with the artworks and themes of this exhibition, but don't feel limited by our prompts. Reflect, doodle, sketch, vent. These responses, we say, are yours to keep or share more broadly through the GardenShip social media channels and website. Your journey begins here. So that's all I'll say about the journal for now.
Thank you so much, Joan. That was great, and a really great way to wrap up our tour of the exhibition, which was meant to be quicker than it was, but it was hopefully rich enough to have kept our audience, most of them have stuck around. We had planned on only going for about an hour and a half, and we've done that, but we still want to take a little bit of time to talk more specifically about water. So I'm going to unshare my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, but before I do, I just wanted to say that, you know, the theme Water is Life really came from a question that Jeff had come up with. And yet when we think about water, and we need to think about it as Laurie and others have so rightly reminded us, we can think about it specifically in relation to the environment, but we can also think about it as a metaphor for life and fluidity. So Jeff is going to help us begin a discussion which we'll try and keep to no more than half an hour and probably less. But I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to get us going.
Thanks, Patrick. When we were talking about the panel, we thought that we should have a set question or several questions that we could ask each of the artists. And I thought about this and I thought, well, this is an important question that we can ask the artist. And I think it's also important in terms of looking at the public and the people that are here tonight in the audience as well to think about. We are human beings. We as human beings tend to not think of climate change, systematic racism, etc., and the coming of catastrophic change until we are denied the things we have taken for granted. Think of the Industrial Revolution as an example, ushering in new things that were heralded as good for the people, yet over the decades, a very different and ominous reality has set in. The artists assembled in the GardenShip exhibition have not stood by on the sidelines of apathy. And regarding the question of water, for example, what do we want the general public to know? We ask each artist to talk about what is or will be missed as a consequence of the actions or inactions of politicians, for example, who are some of the most prominent climate change deniers in society. For my work, Corn Equals Life, I thought about the role the development of corn has meant in historical terms for the people of Turtle Island when it first emerged in what is now Mexico thousands of years ago. And with that, I'll turn it over and see who would like to speak to the question. And if we don't, I'll start calling out names.
Laurie?
Laurie has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm a good student. Yeah, I was thinking about your question, Jeff, and in the terms of, you know, systemic racism and colonization, we would not have climate change without having those elements in there. For millennia, we lived on this land before contact as stewards of Turtle Island. And I was thinking, it got me thinking about the term land back. It took me a while to sort of really figure out, which is a term that's being really, really used in the last few years by Indigenous people. And it's not about like giving us the land back, it's about giving us our stewardship back to the land. And then it got me thinking about, I live in this city of Winnipeg, where we get our water from Shoal Lake, where an Indigenous community could drink from their taps until the fall. And it was the first time in 24 years, which means there's a whole generation in that community that has grown up with having to boil their water. Meanwhile, I turn on my tap here in Winnipeg, and it made me feel really like we're just so screwed. Like, I don't think I had much hope thinking about that. And then also thinking about home in Saskatchewan, and the South Saskatchewan River is one of the most endangered rivers in this country because it's drying up. So, you know, and then that's the Gardner Dam, you know, in 1966 when they flooded the Diefenbaker Lake and blew up one of our sacred stones, which was still being used for ceremony, called Mustacini. So it just got me thinking about all these questions that I've sort of been investigating over the last few years within my practice.
Thanks, Lori. You know, one thing I'll add to that as well is that when we think about saving the earth, we're not talking really about saving the earth. We're talking about saving ourselves, because the earth, the Mother Earth, will always take care of herself and heal herself. But it's what we've done to it as human beings, and the gift that we've abused over a long time. And now we're beginning to see the results of that neglect, and all over the world, and especially with the pandemic as well. So this is a very important point, Lori, so thanks for bringing that up. And did we have somebody else that wanted to add a comment? Michelle?
Thanks. Yeah, I was thinking about this question and how it relates to the stories that I'm trying to tell in that mapping piece. And I think something that the piece makes clear is that conservation has been this technology that we as Westerners have believed could save, you know, small populations, small pockets of land, but separated from their interconnected relationships with like land with a capital L. And we believed in this technology of species management, but when you look at the sites that I'm talking about, the unintended consequences are so complicated, and the money and the time, and they are failures. And we just have to stop believing in this technology of conservation as a way to get out of this. And it's really hard for me to put into words, but I think it starts with this believing that we are discrete and bounded entities, separated from the land, separated from water. And I've been trying to think about like how to communicate bison's connection to water. And there are like very literal things that I can point to. They wallow in the earth and they make these pools that then disrupt plant communities and make space for new life, but also collect water, that their hooves irrigate the soil and so regenerate groundwater. And Winona LaDuke had this beautiful quote that she wrote about the connection of bison to water. She writes, "Buffalo determine landscapes. For thousands of years, the Great Plains, the largest single ecosystem in North America, was maintained by the buffalo. It is said that their thundering hooves danced on the earth as they moved by the millions. Their steps resounded in the vast underground water system, the Ogalla Aquifer, stimulating its health and seeding the prairies. And their destruction set in motion the ecological and economic crisis that now afflicts the region." And so like those are, because we're trained to talk in proofs, you know, those are proofs of the connection of bison to water. But it also goes to like why our conservation efforts are always insufficient, right? Like it's so much bigger than that. And yeah, I just go back to Paul's piece that all flesh is grass, right? Like we are the land is us, we are the water is us. And so we are all kin, and when we poison the water and destroy the land, we're poisoning ourselves. And yeah, I think that this idea of control and of separation is always going to stifle any efforts towards preservation. So yeah, those were my thoughts.
Thanks, Michelle. You know, I was thinking about Adrian, and I think he just put his hand up. So, but I'll mention this as maybe something that you can speak about towards the end if you're not directly speaking about it when you begin. But we've talked about a lot of different aspects of survival. And one of the things that is, when we talk about corn as well, when our peacemaker was traveling across Iroquois trying to unite the tribes, one of the things that he did is he approached a man who was sitting by the edge of a cornfield, and he asked the man what he was doing. And he said, "I'm guarding the corn because it's the future of our children." So I was thinking about Adrian's work with the bumblebee and the Bumblebee Society, and thinking about the children and the importance of bringing the teachings of what we typically think of as the warrior societies. The Bumblebee Society is no longer in existence. A lot of these societies have passed away, but I was heartened when Adrian was talking about maybe this might lead to a renewal of that particular society, and how important that would be in terms of bringing that knowledge to children. And also to add to Michelle's work with the bison or the buffalo, is that it is now used as a teaching element across the Northern Plains for the buffalo people to relate to their children, to bring back those institutions that talk about what Michelle was just mentioning about what the buffalo naturally do for the landscape, and that, but also too that now we're looking at indigenous communities are looking at different ways to inform our children about traditions that they don't necessarily learn anywhere else. So I'll
Great, thank you, Jeff. You're so right. You know, doesn't it all belong or all begin with the children? And so I think, you know, for me in the research of the Bumblebee Society in particular was quite heartening in the sense, you know, it was revived and sort of in a lull right now, but the hope is that it will get revived again, because it all starts from there. And the teachings start from there, and they graduate into the next society, into the next society, into the next society. So all these teachings accumulate into the area of stewardship. And so I think that, you know, in a way that gives hope and sort of is heartening. When I'm thinking of the question that was posed, a couple of things sort of come to mind. First, it's great to be a part of this exhibition, GardenShip, because I just want to give a shout out to my sister Joan in London, because when we were there back in the day, we were gardeners in London, and we tended many gardens in London. So it's kind of ironic to be in the Museum London in a GardenShip show. So I think that's really great. But also another shout out to my mate, Tess Alas from Australia. And I just want to mention Tess because it was Tess who brought me into the down the south of Australia to the areas that had been burnt in the big fires that year. And I couldn't help but feel the trauma of the people and the land and the animals, and the forests were eerily silent. And a moment of realization that we're believing that the end of the world, or more specific, the end of us is near. And I think one of the most things that really stood out to me was the silence, the loss of bird song. And I think that for me, that will be one of the greatest losses that we have as a result of climate change, as a silent world. And so I think about that, and you know, and then of course the other sort of thing of fleeing from Australia from the pandemic, and then a microscopic thing will basically stop us all in our tracks. So I think that, you know, there's many things to contend with. And I hope that this exhibition, in a way, sort of perhaps in an interesting way, makes us love the planet a bit more. You know, I can only come down to those terms, because I think the whole point of us human beings being on this planet is to love it. It's just to love it. And, you know, I think that, you know, I think the pandemic really offered that opportunity, especially for myself, you know, being in the country and being where I live, is to stop and to listen. Listen to nature, listen to the animals. Our elders once told us that we talk to the animals. And I believe it, because I have that opportunity to, for instance, to listen to the gophers, and I start understanding their language. They had a little squeak for me. I could hear that squeak over time and understand that, say, oh, here Adrian's coming, you know? So it's so interesting that if we actually open our hearts and open our ears and open everything else about us human beings, perhaps we have the ability to change things. Thanks.
Thanks, Adrian, for that. Do we have anybody else that wants to step forward? We see Michael. I was going to call on you next anyway, so glad to see the hand go up. But go ahead.
I love the way that this exhibition has kind of come about, and everybody's work kind of feeds off each other, and you know, just a lot of it happened in isolation. But just listening to Jeff and Lori and Michelle and Adrian speak, it sort of it reminds me of some of the inspirations and reasons that I made some of the work in this show. And, you know, Laura, you talked about just how the settlement and the colonial history, we wouldn't be in this situation if this didn't happen. And the idea of stewardship and conservation, you know, one of the things that's really kind of clear to me is, or it's at least a question that keeps coming up, is who is the stewardship for? And I think you said that, Jeff. It's you know, it's to save humans, right, on this planet. But you know, where I live, birds like the cormorant, or in our past the beaver, these are nuisance animals that you know, we allow these animals into our space until they become invasive, right, and take over, and then we eradicate them. There's right now where I live, there's a coyote cull, right, and also an open hunt on the cormorant. You know, and these are all sort of important issues, because we lose our connection. We lose that communication that we have with the natural world, with the ground under our feet, with the water at our shores. And I think for me, you know, Adrian, the same sort of thing happened to me, is really sort of coming back to the place that I lived and really exploring and trying to understand the waterways. And I've married into a Georgian Bay Métis family that lives and breathes on the water. They spent their whole lives on it. And I'm always fascinated and amazed that I can't find my way in Georgian Bay the same way that people who are connected to the land can, or to the water. There's rocks everywhere. If you're driving a boat with a propeller, look out, you're in trouble. Just the other day, I went through a channel that was no wider than my studio, maybe 14 feet wide, and someone did it doing 50 kilometers an hour in a 24-foot boat, because they knew exactly where the rocks would be. And this is fascinating for me, and through this process, you know, of a show like this, and I just think the work that we all do and are trying to get out there. And Jeff, you asked, you know, what do we want people to know? And I think that's it, is to feel that connection, to understand that history. So.
Thanks, Michael. You know, and I think we have something from, I thought I saw Tom's hand go up. And one of the things that I'll mention before he begins speaking is I was really moved when I saw his video that if you come to the exhibition, you can see it next to my work. And we decided, Patrick and I, to have it there along with Tom's support because he had ended with a cornfield. And it was so beautiful and pristine in the way that it was presented in the video. And it made me feel emotional in the sense of, can you imagine that not being there anymore? And so that's why it had a powerful impact on me when I saw that. And once again, I'll just say once again that this was something that came out of our discussions during the curatorial process. But I just wanted to mention that because I don't think I had before, but I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I think there was an earlier question about kind of what, to the artists, what they kind of would take away. And, one of the takeaways for me was the process by which this exhibition came together, and kind of what you don't see behind the scenes are these great conversations that we had very much in Zoom rooms like this over a year where we kind of got to know each other. And working with Jeff and Patrick through the making of these films, it was a series of kind of conversations, and I would listen every time we would talk, and then I would go away and we would work on these films. And it was this kind of organic process that also happened when we met all together as artists, and we shared stories and we shared our artwork. And I think that that's, part of the piece. I too, like Michael, was thinking about the question of what we want the public to know. And I was thinking also about what Paul Chartrand and a number of the artists talked about at the opening around the question of hope, and how kind of hope and despair and the discourse around climate change and ecological destruction. And I think we're all feeling despair is tempting, we're seeing what's going on with seeing what happened at COP26, feeling like perhaps we've been abandoned by the people who are supposed to be representing us. And so I've been thinking about this and the question of hope. There's always this question of like, where do we find it? And I guess through this process, I've been thinking about, we don't find it, we make it, we make hope. It's a verb, and we do that together. We do that in community. We do it in projects like this. And I think, despair is too easy, especially that's something I say like to people in London. We don't despair when people 20 minutes from us don't have drinking water out of their tap. Despair can be privilege, and it can be stasis, and it can be an excuse not to get down and get to work. And so, I found a lot of hope in this process, getting to know these people, and working in the community, and working across communities. And that's something that I took away, and something that I think that is important as we think about how we are going to address these problems together.
Thanks, Tom. So let's see, how are we doing here, Patrick? I saw Patrick hand go up. Why not?
Yeah, maybe I'll launch in a little bit. We probably want to wrap it up within about 5 or so minutes, just so we're not left here by ourselves. Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion. And, I was thinking about COP, and thinking about capitalism, and thinking about racism. And the fact that I think, and I could speak for myself, or I could speak for the kind of the maybe the hegemonic mainstream, that I think that, and what Michelle was saying really made me think about this, that we actually think it's not us that needs to change. We think there needs to be grand changes, but we ourselves don't need to be to change. And then at the same time, we look at what happens at COP and what, Canada has committed to, but some of that commitment is all about carbon capture. So it's as if we don't have to actually change our consumption, we'll just change the rules of the game. And, a good friend of mine who is a Black man said in a class he was teaching to students I was working with, until racism becomes a problem for white people, nothing will ever be solved. And I think that's not only true, but I think what's also true is that until there's an acceptance and a recognition that we need to change, and I'll say we, people from my community, then I think that we're looking at the demise of the human race, I guess. That said, I think that I don't live in hope or I don't live in despair. I do live in hope because I think as an artist, there is something about the need to constantly be changing, thinking differently. And I'm not saying it's a recipe to fix the world, but somehow I do think that working together with a group like this, I think, the art can only do so much, but I think the thinking that becomes possible when we work together can do that much more. And, so I have truly appreciated this project in all its layers and levels, and certainly this conversation today. I don't know if others want to chime in. I don't want to end things, but it'd be good to hear from others and then maybe sign off. Lori?
I just want to say that I do have hope, but I think thinking about what Jeff said about Mother Earth will take care of herself, and I think that's what we see happening, with the floods and the drought, and we're entering I don't know how many years it'll last, but we're entering a drought on the prairies, and it's scary. So, but I do have some hope. I have kids, so I have to have hope.
Absolutely. Joan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this conversation on hope, and it's difficult to have hope sometimes, but just Patrick, you'd posed another question to us, and you said, so if corn equals life and water equals life, what does our art equal? And I'm thinking that this group, as it comes together and does its thinking together, and the conversations, and then the wonderful exhibition, it seems to me that it offers possible futures, and that's hopeful. So that was the thought that was going through my mind, the idea of possible futures.
Thank you.
If you're looking for the last comment, I think that's a perfect one. I think that like as Lori said, sometimes it gets to be disheartening. It's difficult to find a purpose for going on, but somehow or another we've managed to do it for a long time, and it's not going to end now. And I think Joan is right, is that what we're bringing here with this project is a step in that finding a way to be optimistic, to be hopeful, to use our voices and our dreams to see a future that we can all be a part of, not just as separated people as we've been intended to be kept as, but I think as people who are coming together beyond the structures that govern our lives. So I'll just say thanks to everybody for being here tonight as well.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thank you all, and thank you to Josh and the Words Festival for having us as part of this. It's been a real gift to us, and so has the audience. So thank you all. Signing off now, I guess. Good night.